In this short video, which is the first of 3 on converting cognitive science into classroom practice, I'll explore 10 top tips for stimulating student senses in order to gain the active attention of their working memory. But first, some context with which to start. According to the educational psychologist Paul Kirschner, learning is a change in long-term memory. In other words, for students to learn, they must store new information in their long-term memory, or they must alter the information that is already stored in their long-term memory. Perhaps by connecting it to new information, building ever more complex schema or mental maps that speed up students' thinking. Or perhaps by adding further layers of meaning to existing knowledge, thus deepening students' understanding and aiding the transferability of information. How then can we help our students to change their long-term memory and thus learn? For this is surely our primary purpose as teachers. Well, I suggest we follow 3 simple steps. Step 1 is to stimulate student senses in order to gain the active attention of their working memory. Step 2 is to make students think hard but efficiently in order to encode information in long-term memory. And step 3 is to plan opportunities for students to apply prior learning to build both its retrieval and storage strength. Now, I know this is all probably very familiar to you. Certainly there's nothing new about cognitive load theory or the multi-store memory model. But the big question, which perhaps has not yet been answered sufficiently well, is how? How can we convert this now familiar cognitive science into classroom practice? In this video and the 2 that follow, I will offer 10 tangible tips for each of those 3 steps of learning. In this video, the first of 3, will focus on step 1, stimulating students' senses. To stimulate sensory memory and to gain the active attention of students' working memory, we can, I think, do the following 10 things. 1. We can attend to the classroom culture. In other words, we can create an ethos delivered through words and actions in which students feel welcomed, valued, enthusiastic about learning, engaged in their learning, eager to experiment, and rewarded for their effort and hard work. We can do this by greeting students at the door and using their names, by encouraging everyone to contribute, and by explicitly teaching oracy skills. We can do it by modelling enthusiasm, by being excited about teaching our subject and our students. We can do it by planning lessons on the premise of what students will think about, as opposed to what they will do. Top tip 2 is to promote risk-taking and making of mistakes. In other words, we can create a classroom in which taking risks and making mistakes is the default position, and in which drafting and redrafting, improving work in response to feedback is the norm. We can provide opportunities for students to respond to feedback in the lesson in order to signal its importance and enable the teacher to recognise and celebrate student progress. Top tip 3 is to reward hard work and effort. We can reward our students' hard work as opposed to attainment, because to do so creates a more level playing field on which every student has an equal chance of being recognised for their progress, the progress they have made from their individual starting point. We can avoid giving praise for the sake of it or praising students for doing no more than what was expected of them. Tip 4 is to foster a sense of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is founded on students' autonomy, the desire to take control of their own learning, on their mastery, the urge to get better and better at something, and on purpose, a yearning to do what they do in the service of a wider goal. Intrinsic motivation is the want to learn, but it is contingent on students also developing the need to learn. Students need to know why they are learning, what they are learning, and how that learning fits into the bigger picture. So in other words, why it matters and how and when they will use that learning. Top tip 5 is to articulate specific learning outcomes and task instructions. So here we need to decide on the key takeaway messages for each lesson, and we need to use these to frame learning outcomes so that our students know what they are learning and why. Then we need to share the success criteria and model excellence. Once the success criteria have been agreed and shared, we need to model what a perfect final product looks like and deconstruct it to show students each of its constituent parts so that they can emulate it. Top tip 6 is to create an open loop. So here we want to promote a culture in which drafting and redrafting in response to feedback is considered the norm. We want to ensure that feedback leads to improvement and indeed to further practice, which in turn should lead to more feedback being given and so on. Top tip 7 is to explicitly teach study skills. So here we want to establish routines whereby students frequently self-quiz, testing themselves on their study notes, where they elaborate. In other words, they connect new information to what they already know, explaining it to somebody else. We want them to generate, to attempt to answer questions before being taught the answers. And we want them to reflect, to review their learning and how effectively they have learned. And finally, we want them to calibrate, to remove the illusion of knowing something by answering every question, even if they think they know, it is easy, or they have the answer to hand. Top tip 8 is to make ideas stick by grounding them in a sensory reality. So here we want to make ideas tangible, for example, using analogy and metaphor to draw connections between new information and prior learning, or to place new ideas into a useful context. And we want to make ideas real. For example, we want to make abstract concepts concrete. We want to show, not tell. And we want to appeal to our students' emotions to make them feel and therefore to make them care. Top tip 9 is dual code. So here we want to combine verbal instructions with visuals so that students can utilise the verbal and the visual processing powers contained in their working memory, thus increasing their capacity to handle information. And finally, top tip 10 is to improve our students' ability to transfer learning. So here we want to help students to connect what they learn in one topic to what they learn in another, and indeed to other situations in life, and to help them to connect their learning from one context to another context. And that's it for part 1 of this video. For more top tips on teaching, please visit bromleyeducation.co.uk. That's bromleyeducation.co.uk. I hope to see you in video 2.